All right, why don't we get underway then? A very big welcome to this webinar, Tools and Strategies for Implementing Social Distancing in Mass Participation Sports Events. We're here on Zoom. We're also streaming live. I hope if I've pressed the right buttons on Facebook, on the Mass Participation World Facebook page. I'm delighted tonight to be joined from two gentlemen, both in the UK. Welcome to Paul Foster, the founder of OnePlan. Paul has been involved in 6 Olympics and Paralympics, and I think you're calling in from London, Paul. Hello there.
Hi, everybody.
Thanks for joining us. And Marcel Altrenburg, great to see you again, Marcel. Joining from Manchester. I was at your crowd science conference not far off this time last year. Marcel's a senior lecturer in crowd science at Manchester Metropolitan University. Marcel works with a number of the world marathon majors, I think pretty much all of them: Boston, Chicago, London, New York, a number of big football clubs, Liverpool, Man City, currently consulting to the Bundesliga as well, and we'll touch on that during the course of the presentation. So two gentlemen that are infinitely more qualified than me to talk about this topic, but certainly it's a really hot topic, and I think the thing is that there's probably more questions than answers in the sports space generally, and in a number of other areas at the moment. But hopefully we can give a few tools and things as we move forward. And what I'm like to do just before we get underway, I'm going to just launch a poll here just to get a little bit of a sense of where we're from. So you should have a poll up on your screen if you wouldn't mind just plugging in there where you're from while I do a little bit of housekeeping. Everyone, please, if you wouldn't mind staying mute for us. There's no cameras in this format apart from the 3 handsome gentlemen on the screen. But I do have the chat box and the Q&A box up. So please, the idea is that this is as interactive as possible. So please keep putting the questions through, and I'll try my best to have a look at those, the Q&A and or the chat box, and try and get back to you and answer as many as possible. The recording for this will go up live, usually within 24 hours, on the Mass Participation World YouTube channel. And just quickly before we get underway, a couple of other initiatives that we at Mass Participation World are running, and a number of people on this call have been part of those. So every Monday we have Strength in Numbers, which is 2 sessions, 8:30 a.m. Singapore time, 4:30 p.m. Singapore time, to try and cover as much of the world as possible. And it's just an open Zoom chat room for an hour, open mic, which I host, and just welcome people in to come and share their challenges, their observations. And we've certainly been getting people from all over the world tuning into that and giving some great insights and sharing what's happening in their countries. About 4 weeks ago, I launched an initiative called the Aid Station. I think today we just launched episode 24. They are daily interviews with people from across the industry and across the world, fundamentally pre-recorded, about 15 to 18 minutes. We've had the likes of Andrew Messick. This week we had Joe DeSena. In a couple of weeks' time, I'm hoping that I'm going to have John Ridgen. And then we have a whole bunch of ordinary people. No one's ordinary in our industry, but amazing people that are not in high profile, doing amazing things, just sharing their story. So if you'd like to be on it, or you know someone who you think would tell a great story, trying to cover as many countries as possible, not constantly coming back to the usual suspects. So trying to go to some unique places. I was in Ethiopia today, and that one will be going live tomorrow. So some wonderful people that I'm talking to. And then just finally, these Mass Participation World Masterclasses each Thursday. The times vary a little bit depending on who the panelists are. Next week, we're going to be talking about volunteers, the opportunity to be working with your volunteer workforce during these downtimes, and hoping to have, almost certainly having Shannon Gove on that one, and a couple of other people. The week after, some of you would have tuned in about a month ago to a very informative session with Mike Nishi from Chicago Marathon, and Hugh Singh, who is the medical director of the Singapore Marathon, based out of Western Australia, runs a hugely successful company there, helping with medical support. It was titled The New Operational Normal, and that will now, with the kind agreement of those two gentlemen, will become a monthly session on the last Thursday of every month. So that's coming up on the 28th. And then on the 4th of June, a very hot topic, which many people are wrestling with, frustrated with in some instances, I hear, is talking about insurance. We're going to have 2 different panels probably there, some more American-based and some more my part of the world, Asia, and the like, to give people a bit of a sense. So just going to publish the poll. 78% of us from the mass participation, or 64%, sorry, from the mass participation industry. Other parts of sport, we got a bit of music and festivals, government, corporate, and not-for-profit. I'll just pop that up on the screen quickly for those of you that may be interested. Just one other quick poll, just to give us a bit of a sense of where you might be within those sectors, whilst I just give you another quick overview. Sorry, just work out how to get rid of that poll and bring another one up. There we go, poll number 2, just to get a sense, please, of the different services that you provide within the sectors. So we're going to try and cover over the next hour 7 key areas. We're going to talk about the importance of scenarios, and certainly Marcel's going to share some insights into how the Bundesliga got to where they are, where they're about to kick off behind closed doors. And part of that was that they took a huge number of scenarios to different government agencies. We're then going to break it down into, I guess, a little bit of a flow of social distancing with pre-event day activities. We're going to talk about staffing and the like in terms of social distancing in training and so on, then getting to the start line, runner congregation areas, start areas, finish lines, medical. We're going to talk about start line pens and flow. We're going to speak about the course density on the course, aid stations and so on. And then we're going to give you a little bit of an offer at the end. Paul yesterday launched part of his OnePlan, an opportunity to be able to program in social distancing in his software. And as a result of you attending this, he's going to offer a 20% discount for your first month if you're interested in being part of OnePlan and using that on your planning as we move forward. But getting into the I guess the nuts of it, just quickly share this poll. 67% here from event organizers, a few rights holders, some suppliers, some federations, and some other people in that space. So I'll just quickly stop sharing that and get rid of that one. Thanks for that. I just thought it would be useful for us to get a sense of who was on the call, but clearly a lot of mass participation and a lot of event organizers in the call. And maybe just start, if I may, by throwing to you, Marcel, and we were talking in our planning call of, the Bundesliga. You've been working with them. It's obviously well publicized. And the observation you made that the reason you believe that they got to where they were is that they went with, I think you said, 10 different scenarios, and as a kind of a transference to us. And, one of the things that I've been discussing on these weekly strength in numbers calls has been one of the real topics of conversation is, will participants be terrified to come back to mass participation once the guideline, once things get lifted and we're allowed to? And my increasing sense, anecdotally, what I'm seeing of people flocking back to beaches in Australia and Jacksonville in America and shopping centers and bars is that there's going to be less of a fear of participating than we've been talking about on these calls over the last few weeks. There was a real discussion that people were saying participants just aren't going to be prepared to be on a start line with other people. The sense it seems to be shifting that people are going to be itching to get out there, but we're going to be controlled by what governments allow us to do. And the sense that we need to get on the front foot, take scenarios to them with the opportunity that we might be able to get some solutions that work for both parties. So enough of me. Over to you, Marcel, maybe just to share a little bit over a few minutes of how the Bundesliga, in terms of what you're able to share from a confidentiality perspective, were able to get to where they were.
Yeah, first of all, I share your observation of people having an urge. It's anecdotally, but also some partners in the event world, they already have numbers, they already have interest in tickets and so on, and they will have early observations that we can all learn from. I share your observation, and I think the normal is guided by what we want, not guided by what we have to do during a horrible time like this. And I want to share, I'm not allowed to say any names, Chris said enough already, but I can share some of those concepts that really worked and some preparations that worked and brought some sports already back into the discussion as something that we was running. We are all responsible to get back, get a positive lobby, get the lobby that we had, start from zero, and be perceived as something good and not something risky. That responsibility lies with all of us and lies with those events that go forward first or those who mention something first. I want to share a couple of slides, but those are more like guidance. I can be interrupted anytime or with questions. Let me just.
You got the sharing there?
Do I? Okay.
You should be able to share there now, Marcel.
Cool. Let me try my best.
Coming up. There you go.
Cool. Can you see something that looks like a presentation?
Yeah, we got it.
Good. So one thing that happened with all of us, and that's not just running, so we're in good company. We were all pretty much stopped in our tracks. We were going high speed. We were all successful. And that is very painful. And we now need to go basically back to zeros. We need to bring solutions to questions that we didn't think would be possible just a few months back. And that is very painful. And most of them solutions, they bring new questions, and that will happen for a couple of levels until we hopefully make it through those, answer those strategic questions, and come to an operational level. Once we're there, and some sports are already there, where they broke down all the big topics to operationally solvable problems, I believe that we're then at our strong point. We do have a lot of problem solvers in our industry. Maybe we have the best in the world of operational people. And as soon as we're at this level, we can work from there. Before we get there though, and we need to talk about feasibility and a more complex level of questions, we can only come to 3 answers with everything that we try, that we lay out, that we check for its feasibility. And that is either good, we can go ahead with restrictions. Currently, nobody can go ahead with restrictions, even if we go to the supermarket. The second answer to every question or scenario could be, well, we would need one exception, or we need one development in order to go ahead on one certain aspect. That is also very crucial. And you talked about football without me naming the names, but they knew they need one exception, and that was behind a dot. It was a really tiny value where they realized we need an exception here, but we can describe very precisely what we need in order to lead a discussion, in order to go into negotiations. They were fully informed what it means going this or the other way. Or the third part would be where we cannot go ahead right now. We're just too far away from where we need to be. So those 3 answers are basically the only 3 answers that can come from doing a sense check, doing a strategy feasibility check, and all are better than uncertainty. And I want to walk you through real quick, but Chris said it already, and football in Germany is not the only one. There's also, I need to be careful, baseball and a lot of other things. You can Google those who are back into the conversation and who are launching things, although they don't look like normal. And that was their key to success. They didn't start from normal. How can we do it from where we were? How much do we need to size down? Or where will we get back to the success that we had before? They all have in common that they started from zero. And they said, let's do something that has the core of our sport, but it otherwise looks completely different. And they controlled everything around it. They said, let's really start from zero. Let's try to make it feasible, but create something that is safer than what you currently have on the streets. Let's take advantage of the controlled environment that we have. May that be a stadium, may that be an event footprint, but we have full control in there, more than the government has control of the beaches or of the sidewalks, and work from there, work up from there. And then at one point, whenever time is right, we will get back to where we were before. And what they did, if I'm allowed to go through a couple of slides, is they brought things into a balance that they can control. And they were really clear in what they can control and knew what where they would need help from the government, or where they would need things to develop, or where they would need an exception in some sense in order to get the show on. And those are, as we all know, it's arrival, perimeter, the event area, start, the course of our races if we stay in a mass participation world, the finish and the post-finish, all the things that we are also in a normal world are responsible for, where we want to increase our numbers or increase our quality. They still remain, and they need to be more balanced than ever, because whoever goes first, they'll have all eyes of the world on their event, and they jump in the water for the rest of the industry, and they need to deal with that most responsibly. And that's the same case for, as you said, football in Germany. The Premier League in the UK is looking at it. France is looking at it. Everybody is looking what the Germans are doing now and see if they are successful in the risk they're taking. To run through it real quick, luckily everything that we see on the top of the slide here, we have under control. We have our numbers right. We are a number-driven sport, and we can balance those, or can start balancing those. And currently in the research that we've done with New York, Chicago, and the industry leaders, it is mainly the start that we need to start working on, get an idea how to get our show back to the core product, which is on the course, is the people running. And we need to know how many people we can start. And that is based on the time that we're living in. Like, it's May, the time in April looked different, the time in June will look different. And the situation in Germany looks different than it looks in the UK, than it looks in Ireland for that matter, or the US. So we need to know how many people we can start in our very individual scenario. And let's name that X. I will not bore you with numbers, couple. So that number is X that we can release on the course.
Can we maybe, Marcel, let's
yes.
maybe go and kind of move through, and we'll come back to the course stuff and bring the slide up again,
sure.
if that's okay. Let's
sure.
maybe just bring in, thank you for that. Maybe just bring in Paul to talk about some of the kind of pre-event activities. So, you know, in terms of some of the things we speak about typically in our event, you know, training runs, expo, race pack collection, you know, how that works in there, and then we'll swing back again and bring that slide up and start talking about the number of people on the start line and so on. But just some insights, Paul, to bring you into the conversation about, you know, as we step through this, it's obviously not just when we get to the start line, but there's a whole bunch of pre-events that would typically happen in this event, and just be interested to get your insights in terms of some strategies and tools around that, please.
One of the big challenges we've got at the moment is there's no case study of how something has operated successfully with social distancing. So we've got to learn quickly. We've got to come up with concepts quickly. We're all going to be at some point in meetings with government, with law enforcement, and they may be at the mindset of, well, this event's not going to go ahead, and I've got 1,000 reasons why it's not going to go ahead. So we have to have a strong case about what we can do to ensure the safety and maintaining kind of public safety for the participants, but also kind of spectators going there. A lot of challenges with the road events is you also impact on people in the business as usual arena as well. So it's not just, you know, the people to come and observe. It's also, you know, people moving around doing their kind of daily business. So what I always say to people that the pillars of kind of crowd movement, which I always teach, are time, space, and information. So think about when the timing of the event is, can it adjust? Can we change the time that people are kind of traveling? And then looking at the space. Can we spread how people are arriving? Can they come from different metro stations and different car parking lots in different areas, not having them all on the same route, and trying to get some information about how people arrive? And then, you know, information is key. You know, people will say, well, when do you first start engaging with crowd management? Is it when they leave the train station or get to the event? Well, no, it's the first time they're thinking about either buying a ticket to come and attend or being a participant. It's when they're on their website, engage with them on that early point. And I think wherever possible, you know, let's learn from kind of some of the mistakes that are happening at the moment in terms of, you know, retail who are opening up. And I'll just share one picture now, which kind of sums this up quite nicely, if that's okay. So I'll just share my screen quickly. Chris, can you just confirm you can see my screen okay?
I can see your screen, yeah, it's there, thank you. You might,
okay,
yeah,
so this is a coffee shop in my village. They decided to open up last week, and very proactively they thought, well, we'll put a queue system outside, and there'll be 2 meters of distance between each people who queue. And as you'll see here, there's only 3 people queuing for a coffee. So they queue here, this guy here with a dog, and then someone will come out, take his order, and then bring out his coffee. Then the next person, there's 1 more behind. The problem is this person here his position of where he's been asked to stand is right in that footpath. Now, I went along here with my 2 young children. I want to go across to the cricket pitch over there and have a kickabout. Well, I've got to stop here. I've got to go into the road and all the way around that queue. And you'll see this lady here. She's actually having to navigate around this queue of people. And remember, there's only 3 people in this queue. She then goes into the road and then joins the footpath again. Now, if she gets hit by a car, whose fault is that? Well, it's still the responsibility of the driver and the pedestrian. Things don't change just because of coronavirus. But there would be certainly something that came back to that cafe and said, well, actually, you know, what are you doing here? You're pushing people into the road. Now, that's just a very small scenario created by 3 people queuing for a coffee shop. What happens when we invite hundreds and thousands of people? What's the potential impact? So we have to think very, very carefully about how we plan for people coming to our event. So that's my kind of key takeaways on that, Chris.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. And then I guess, you know, same thing comes, we get the go ahead, and again, Marcel, without, you know, breaking a whole bunch of confidentialities, there's been a lot of stuff that's been in the media already about Bundesliga and stadiums being, you know, staff in the stadiums, whatever. We come to the whole training part of things. So, you know, training our volunteers, training our staff, you know, your sense of how do you build that in before we've even got to the participants. We haven't even got them, you know, at the event site yet. You know, some tips and strategies around that. You know, probably in the next few weeks, if at all, that's going to be done in a virtual space. But you know, we get to the stage where we've got a date for our event. Pick that might be, you know, September, October, November, wherever that may be, and we've got to start bringing our volunteers in and so on. What are some of the strategies and things that need to be taken care of there?
Well, as you said on your masterclass together with Mike Nishi, you need to look like how many people do you actually need, and try to like limit that, because they also take up space. So every event needs to be calculated in with the number of volunteers that you have there. They need to deliver to a certain quality or to a certain standard that you will be measured on. At the same time, you need to be able to deal with everything that doesn't go like planned. And when people talk about taking temperature, for example, you need to know what to do with those people who do not satisfy whatever you're measuring. And you need to plan what to do, how to deal with them if they agree or not agree, and how to deal with that safely. So there's much more that you need to include in. And that's also what Paul said, with everything that you do with people. Currently, we don't have a lot of space because our space was divided by 4 in a way, just with including those measures. That's something that I will come to in a second, how you can deal with that space on arrival at your event site. Started with a start because that's a crucial point, but then everything else connects to that arrival and also return home.
Yeah, and I think, you know, coming back to that, the key point is that the space you're going to require is going to be so much bigger. So a volunteer training space, and you know, you're going to share some metrics on a start line, but it goes even before that, where you would have normally trained your volunteers in an auditorium or a classroom, you might need a space 4 times the size of that to be able to do your volunteer training. We've got a question in here already, Paul. You mentioned your 3 principles: time, space, information. Can you explain a little bit more about information, please? And that's from someone anonymous, so I'm not sure who they are, but if you'd like to just respond to that, that'd be great, please.
Yes, there's various ways we can kind of communicate, and it's about informing and educating people. And think about that through the whole spectator journey or the whole participant journey, from the first point at which they engage with you, which often in these cases is through social media. So reminding people, you know, about the distances, the route at which they should they take. And where there is some good examples of this are places like McDonald's, and some of the big supermarkets are very, very good at consistently kind of engaging with people. I'll just share kind of a good and bad example for you now on the screen. So here is an example from kind of McDonald's of how they're communicating with their participants and people who want to buy something from them, very close to the point at which they're served. It's communication and information on the ground, so where they should potentially stand. The problem with this is it's not clear. Do you stand in the box or do you stand on the line? So making sure that information is clear and consistent. They are doing some testing in Holland and the McDonald's. Now here, it's very clear information, because clearly you need to stand in the big yellow circle. And it's big enough to accommodate 3 or 4 people if you're there with a family, and you'll see then there's smaller arrows in between. So it's very clear and consistent information. So, you know, right up front before they're actually kind of even arriving, information on websites, social media, and it's going to be more important than ever before. And what you can also do is some kind of proxy measures. Ask people how they intend to arrive, what's their intended routes they're taking, and get a bit of a proxy measure in terms of where you think there may be some challenges. Do you need to reinforce some messages about different viewing areas or coming in on different routes, for example? And linking in with the transport providers, they're very good at reaching a lot of people and giving a lot of information out to people. So if they're getting on a transport network or they're driving in a certain route, what can they do to support you to ensure they arrive in the right place at the right time when you're kind of expecting? So there's plenty of good examples out there as well as bad examples. And don't forget in reverse as well. So don't just think, right, race is over, let's all, well done, pat on the back, it's all great. Because remember, you know, whatever happens, it might not be your responsibility kind of outside the venue, but if there is an issue, there's a big crowd, people are on Twitter taking images, the press are there taking photographs, it'll be seen as your reputation there. If there's big masses of people together and it's on the front page of the papers the next day, it's still your kind of reputation, whether that was actually your responsibility or not. So you need to link it with those partners and get just a very, very kind of consistent message out to people.
Fantastic. So, you know, great opportunities to learn from others, look at what's happening. You know, it doesn't have to be another event. It's what's happening in supermarkets. It's what's happening on public transport. And, you know, talking about tools and strategies, you know, one of the most important strategies is your communication strategy. You know, how are you communicating to people from the start, in the lead up, on event day, all the way through? And again, this is going to be coming back to where we started with, if you want to get the ear of government agencies to be the exception rather than the rule, those are going to be all the kind of things. It's not just going to be about your social distancing plan. It's going to be everything around that, how you're going to communicate, how you're going to put it in place. It's not just the distance between participants and spectators and so on. Why don't we come back to you now, please, Marcel? I think, you know, we've touched on you know, the scenarios pre-event day. We've touched on staffing, check-in, deployment. We've touched a little bit on stand down, and clearly the, you know, the nux of this for the mass participation people on here that I think everyone's hanging in for here is to understand how we structure our starts and manage our waves and those kind of things. We've touched a little bit on transport and getting there. Paul already on that, but why don't we move into that slide that you had up and start to move it along a little bit, please?
Yeah, I will keep it short, and I will not bore you with some numbers. One thing that I wanna add is those that we worked successfully with, who got their exceptions, they weren't seen as exceptions, they were seen as industry leaders. Basically, those who would need to go first, those that you would address in order to get this back on the road, because somebody has to at one point. So those who were prepared, those who did it, they were prepared like they were prepared like excessively. If you look at the Bundesliga, that's something that everybody can Google, but they had a document of 41 pages which showed different options, which showed how prepared they are in order to go forward, go backward, how flexible they would be, and how responsible they would be. And they were seen as like being basically maybe even more prepared than the opponent on the table. And that's why they got the go ahead, because they were able to show this responsibility. And we need to do the same in running. I left off with, we need to figure out our under our own restrictions in our country, in our time. How fast could we even start? We need to start from zero. That's very important, not work down. In order to everything that Paul said, to not obstruct ourselves or obstruct the public, we can only let as many people into our event space as we can release at the same time. And it sounds logical, it works with every scale like this, but it's an advantage that we have in running that festivals that don't have. They just fill, play, and then they all go. We can strike a balance between people we flood out on the road and people we let come in, but it needs to be balanced. And based on that, I can calculate how many people I can let in safely. And that's also guided by government regulations, which, give you a short example, keep it very short in numbers. If I have a 12-meter wide road and I feel comfortable of starting 5 people aside every 3 seconds, that would go ahead with something we could do when the time is right. In the UK, for example, I could start 100 people per minute, let 100 people in, and I can take in 3,000 in 30 minutes, plus some excess if something goes wrong. But that would be the balance I would go for. And now I'll come to this information that Paul talked about. We now need to know what happens on the course. We need to know what happens at the finish by what we produce. That's something that we can do. We have the tools for that in order to take our start and measure what that means for the finish. And not just measure it, but also prove it. So we could take this example that we just created in a couple of seconds and measure out the course and could prove, this is from a live example on the course, where we could prove to ourselves and later to the government that never less than 2 meters, that we have always more space than 2 meters to the next runner on the course. You can read this from top to bottom. We always have, it's hovering around between 2 and 4. We always have around 3 meters that we could keep between all runners on the course, 360 degrees at all points in time. And we can measure our course. That's part of the responsibility that we need to do. And then we can communicate, as Paul said, we can communicate to people. We provide you more than 3 meters in all directions on the course. Please use it, because the guidelines that are in place in the normal public, they're also applicable for our race. We give you the resources for that. Run responsibly, just as you would do on a sidewalk, and maybe even safer as you can do on a sidewalk. And that's where we go to this very controlled environment. And as Paul said, we need to control it. And with every information we give, we need to check, is it received, and we can learn from others.
So those are interesting numbers. Just to interject, there is
Yes.
We got Sapna in the comments is saying we'd have a marathon week instead of a marathon day. But you know, we were talking in the planning call, and you say you've been doing what you seem to indicate was some fairly what's the right word? Optimistic modeling, confident modeling around events of 12 to 15,000 people that you believe that you'd be able to achieve some social distancing. So sure, there's going to need to be some compromises made somewhere. And you know, if you overlay that example with the Bundesliga, their compromises, they get to play behind closed doors, they get some broadcast revenue, they get something of a business model, and they have an event. If we're sitting here thinking that we're a 50,000 event or a 25,000 or 30,000 people event, and we're going to be able to continue to do that, maybe we're dreaming. And I think the point that you made is we need to take a step back and say, well, okay, we think we can accommodate 12 to 15,000 people. If we can get the approval, is that then commercially viable? And the point you were trying to make is there's no point even going to the table with a government agency if you haven't got scenario 1 to 5 at least, and maybe a scenario 10, and you understand what the economic commercial impact of that is on your business. Would you like to maybe elaborate on that?
You're perfectly right on this. And I would even say further, I wouldn't say it's optimistic. I would say it's realistic, because we don't start with the idea of, is it financially viable? We really start fresh with a empty sheet of paper. We see what we can do. We measure out our event realistically. And just in the end, we ask ourselves, is it financially viable or not? We need to be careful not to be driven by this wish to go back to normal too quickly, or to have some pressure by our own numbers. We need to go in and start from zero, as I said. But the good thing is, do you know how much space you actually give on the course? That's very hard. That's very complex to say. When the government says keep X meter, and that might be different from one place to another, but do you actually know where you are? Because you need to understand where you are in order to understand what you need to meet. How far are you off? And that's one bit of positive news in running world. It was always good quality to give 1.5 to 2 meters on the course in all directions. So we are quite well off on this. Most just don't know, and that's very important. In order to, everybody knows that if you want to see your goal, you need to know where you are and basically start moving. But if you don't have the initial information, nobody has. The government doesn't have it. So we when we measure events, to answer your question, when we measure events, we realize on the course they normally have 2 meters or more, and there are measures to give them 4 meters or more, 5 meters or more, 360 degrees, whatever is necessary.
So the question just, thank you, a question just popped in from Mukesh Mishara saying, but how can we force runners to follow this? And I think that the reality is that we can't. And it's just like we spoke about at the beginning. We can't force people to go to the beach and stay the distance. You can't force people to go into shopping centers and stay the distance. You can put guidelines in place. And I think as an industry, we have that responsibility, or that opportunity more than responsibility, to be able to go to government agencies, permitting agencies, and say, this is the plan that we propose. This is how we would like to work with you to put it in place. And there's going to be some give and take and compromise, like there's been with the Bundesliga, like there's been with, things like the NRL in Australia, rugby union in New Zealand that's about to get underway in the next couple of months. That hasn't been an overnight occurrence. It's been a conversation that's gone backwards and forward in partnership, which I believe that our industry is so good at. We go and work with agencies and governments and recognize that they have a set of issues they need to achieve. We have a set of issues. This is about partnership and trying to get a seat at the table and work out something that's going to be mutually acceptable.
And I want to add to that before I hand it back to Paul. You're perfectly right. We cannot force them, and we were never able to force them. I mean, some tried to force people to run without headphones, and nobody's trying that anymore. We will not be successful, but we are in one boat with the general public, with every supermarket, with the government. Their guidelines, the current rules about hygiene and physical distancing, they are the same within our event footprint as outside. We need to make sure that we give them the space, and that is our responsibility. And as I said before, the successful events that are back in the conversation and are back having a show in the next couple of months and weeks, they provided an environment that is safer than running on the footpath right now in London or running through the park, because it is highly controlled and we take advantage of this control. But again, to control it, we need to know where we are, and we need to show that we basically provide something that is safer than running in London on the same day without having an control event around it. It's a hard thing to do, and I need to then basically show that I have my numbers right, that I have my details right, and that I can, as Paul said, develop a relationship with my participants to work together. And that's information, and that information needs to be received, and there need to be the willingness to follow it. And we can go to other leaders in the industry who are doing this for a while now, and those are airports. We worked with airports before, and they, like if you take Frankfurt Airport, they transport 28 times as many people through their system every day than they have capacity. And we would currently go to something as well, because we cannot fill our space all at once and then flood it out. We would need to do something similar. And if you look at your airport, if your airline ticket, it has like 4 times on it. And those 4 times, they tell you where they want you at individual points. And your ticket is just for you or your small cohort of your flight. And it tells you when you're supposed to be started. It tells you when you're supposed to arrive at the footprint. And it tells you even when you should start from home. Everybody uses Google Maps. And that's what airlines also say. Basically, type in when you want to be at the airport, and then use Google Maps to like start individually from your doorstep. And that goes into Paul's point. The crowd management begins at their individual doorstep. And that's nothing new. I mean, Google is doing it, airlines are doing it. We can learn a lot from them. If they would do it wrong, they would fail at the airports. And those are people that we can learn from, something that we didn't need to do before.
Thanks, Marcel. Why don't we throw back to you on that, Paul? Because I think it's, there's a comment here from Nick Emmons saying, does that mean we can't really race? Competitive people will want to overtake, and that would reduce the distancing. I mean, I think there's, the arrival analogy of the airport, the different seating zones they have in planes. It's no different really to the start pens of faster athletes being in the front pen. Sure, there's going to be an element of overtaking, but it's the same as overtaking on the footpath or passing someone in the aisle of a supermarket, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's always a thing to go back on. What's the likelihood of contracting the COVID-19 virus during your particular event, according to going to a shopping mall at the moment? There can be assumption just because it's a 5K race with, when they see 5,000 people racing, it's not going to work. Well, is that actually the case? And I'll just post in the chat here, there's some interesting kind of research which has come out of China in the last couple of weeks, which actually compares the transmission of COVID-19 indoor environment according to an outdoor environment. And of the 1,000, I think 270 odd people that were that they traced back, they only found one of those had actually contracted it in an outdoor environment. Obviously, that particular report's not been peer reviewed yet, and it was undertaken during a lockdown period. So, it still needs to be kind of challenged. But that's a pretty stark number, 1 out of 1,240. So, I think we can start to kind of build the case for it. And I think we need kind of more examples of that. And when I was on the call a few days ago talking about stadiums and arenas, we're looking at the circulation being outside of the stadium as opposed to in the main kind of concourse areas. And that's one of the mitigations that could reduce the risk of person-to-person kind of contact over that period of time. I wonder if it's worth me kind of just mention a couple of the calculators we've just kind of launched this week, Chris, in terms
that'd
of
be great,
just helping people on an arrival process. If we're thinking about maybe a ticket check, an accreditation check, or a search and screening process, obviously people are going to be kind of queued up there. So we've always had an arrival model in the OnePlan system. So essentially it looks at capacity and it looks at demand. Capacity is how many people can you process per 15 minutes. So how many tickets can you check? How many people can you search and screen in a 15-minute period? Then looking at your demand. So how many people are you expecting to arrive every 15 minutes? And now we've also added in kind of social distancing to this calculator. So what you do first of all is you put in your entrances. You can add as many as you'd like. You add in how many people you can process in 15 minutes, what time that opens and then closes. And you can put different parameters in for each of those entry points because you might have a different flow rate somewhere. And then you put in how many people you're expecting to arrive every 15 minutes. And this gets you to ask the right questions of yourself, because it's not about the total number of people you're expecting. It's about these kind of peak periods of times where you've got risk. The system will then give you the maximum number of people in the queue, the maximum wait time, and importantly, what is your space requirement to accommodate those people by social distancing. So you can put in 2 meters, 6 foot, or 1.5 meters. And that will give you a baseline to start planning. How much spacing are you needing? The second of the 3 tools we've got is the exit and evacuation assessments. So this is looking at the number of people per minute per meter that you can move through a space. And that's different. The flow rate is different whether you're going downstairs, whether you're on a grass surface, and the type of people you have. Is it fit young people, or is it family groups, or is it people at a festival who have been drinking? So the maximum flow rate you'd have is 82 people per minute per meter, and you'd bring that down according to your kind of risk assessment. Then you add in the width of your exit gate, and then you can add in what your social distancing measure is, and that will instantly give you how many people you can move through that space in 5, 10, 15 minutes. So just some basic tools we can start to help you plan and start to help you realize what some of your challenges is. We also have one for kind of a space area, but I think we're going to come on to that a little bit later.
Thanks, useful. Marcel, any further comments on that?
Yeah, I want to add why this is very important, like those tools that Paul said, or similar tools. We just want to show real quick why they are so important, because the nuances, they do a lot for our events. If I would ask you, under German rules right now, they say have 1.50 meters between people to be safe. UK rules say 2 meters. Both obviously governments are doing their best, but both are really just taken as a guideline. Nobody's really laser measuring 2 meters. But the difference it makes from 1.50 meters to 2 meters is, under 1.50 meters, I could start, on the example I had earlier, 6,000 people per hour, and with 1.50 meters, I could start 12,000. So by just going 25% in the distance that is allowed, 360 degrees, I can double the people I can safely start. And one is considered safe in the UK, the other thing is considered safe in Germany. I'm not talking about UK and Germany here, but things will change. And maybe I realize that I only need 10 more centimeters or 10 less centimeters in order to make what I need work. If I'm allowed to show that really quick, just how things work and how unfortunate it is for our events, unfortunately, is to have a queue and need to put the distance between people. It just grows, just expands, linear. If I need to do it for a crowd like we do in our start events, it grows exponentially. That reminds us all of our math teachers, and we realize how big of an advantage that is. Just three numbers. If I start 10,000 people in 1.50 meters, I need 70,000 square meters. And just with this half meter more that I discussed, 25% more, I would need almost double the space. And that works reverse as well. This for our American visitors. They sit somewhere in the middle. But this just shows if something changes by 10 centimeters or a bit, or one of those rules which are somewhat arbitrary, we're all doing it for the first time. But if any of those are changing, it would have massive implications. And maybe that is one of those things where I can go forward and say, hey, if we go with 5 feet instead of 6, we could make it happen. What we do in turn is like we have sanitizers everywhere. We do other measures. And this is one of those starts to have a negotiation. Maybe with my local city or my local park and say, hey, we're doing it in the forest. We put certain measures in place. Can we do it with 1.50 meters? Because that would mean a big difference. But I need to know those. I need to do this homework beforehand. And to keep one question that came up earlier about overtaking, to plug to my friends in Chicago and New York, we modeled 30 plus races, 3 dozen races already this year. We took races from last year, remodeled them under COVID-19 as an experiment, not with the idea to launch them next week, but to educate ourselves. And we realized there are ways of starting in a revolving system where arrival is balanced to people starting. And we have a free-flowing perfect system which allows people to overtake on the course. We would build that space in. We would need the percentage. We would build a percentage in that people can overtake on the course and have a race that is similar to what they had before. They keep their distance. They look for their spot, different than they did before, but they can overtake. That goes along with some etiquette on running that we all know. I mean, not spitting is one thing. The footballers are learning this right now, but to overtake on the left side or right side, depending from where you are in the world, and to do things like this. We say we give it an environment, highly controlled. This is what we expect you to do. And then we can have something that looks like a normal race.
It's interesting, the etiquette, and there's a comment in the chat as well. I mean, you know, one of the gentleman, Dennis Cranston, I'm not sure if Dennis is on the call, but he dials in every morning every Monday morning to our strength in numbers calls, and he tells us a massive backlash in America, and there's quite a few people in America on the call towards runners at the moment, because the perception is that maybe, I think the number he quoted is 10 or 15% of runners are running with masks, and the general public is saying that they should be running with masks, and the concern that they're sweating and sweat's flying, and you know, people are worried about it. So the whole education as an industry, I was on one of Mike Nishi's Chicago event management, race management program calls 2 weeks ago, and I forget the name of the gentleman who heads up the biggest running group in Chicago, and they were strictly advising all of their runners that they should be running in masks from a PR perspective. Get used to it. It's going to take you a little bit while to adjust, but within a week or so you've adjusted to it, and you're doing the better good for everyone. So us as event organizers, this is part of the communication we were talking about earlier. You know, it starts way before we even get to the race. That whole communication part of it is so crucial. Yeah.
And that is balancing. So that is balancing with arrival. That is balancing with perception as well. And that means we don't just assess where we are today, just as the Bundesliga did, or others which I can't name did, is knowing where we would need to be. We don't assess to start tomorrow, but things will change and things will develop. And maybe I can look for those things that would need to come into my favor. And those are nuances, but for this I need to prepare today.
Thank you, Marcel. Maybe coming back to you, Paul, just around the aid station element of it. So we've got the start, we've spoken about that. You know, there's a number of congestion points that are going to happen on the course. The aid station is one of them, maybe medical facilities is another. As we get to the finish line, people potentially being in close proximity. Any thoughts around that in terms of strategies for managing that? You know, some of the modeling tools that you've been sharing already. Marcel, obviously from the start right perspective, that flows all the way down, and you work from the back to go forward. But you know, clearly the aid stations is a key element. Any thoughts around that, Paul?
Yeah, so the key challenge, and again, this is across all parts of the event industry, and with stadiums is a very, very good example. You can't necessarily now, because your numbers of participants may be reduced because you need social distancing. It's the same in the stadia. No one's really expecting to go anywhere beyond 30% for stadium. But what they can't do is reduce down the numbers of services or close the top tier, because you need to maintain the space. So you can't really kind of cut down the numbers of kind of aid stations, because you're going to need them to enable people to kind of be able to spread out. And that's when it gets really, really challenging in terms of making it financially viable, because you may be cutting down your numbers by 2/3, but you still need to maintain you know, an enhanced level of service, so people aren't waiting. And so it does make it kind of incredibly difficult. But again, we're probably going to need to learn and look at other examples from things that have been happening outside of the event industry to look at what's worked well and what's not worked so well. So retail's an obvious one. There's plenty of bad examples kind of out there, but a few good examples are kind of emerging. And I think later on I'll show an example of a protest that took place with social distancing a couple of weeks ago, which I think might be interesting, but it's probably more relevant for some of the kind of fan zone scenarios, or where there's kind of big groups together. So I think I'll probably maybe leave that for a little bit later on, Chris.
Yeah, why don't you jump into, you know, I'm conscious the time's absolutely flown. We've only got 7 or 8 minutes left. So why don't you jump into that and show it quickly now?
Okay, great. So yeah, hopefully you can see my screen. So it's a fascinating scenario. So this is a protest in Tel Aviv a couple of weeks ago, and it was all done with social distancing. And as you can see, people are broadly kind of 2 meters apart from each other. And what the protests kind of organizing group did beforehand is marked out this whole square to kind of support people in trying to keep their social distancing. And the idea was family groups would stay within the kind of square blocks together. So they made some efforts. What we don't know is actually how people arrived into that space and departed. So some of the tools we've identified could help that. So this is what they look like. They painstakingly kind of drew out these kind of areas, but it gives a kind of a benchmark of kind of examples. So what we've done is looked at that in terms of potential viewing areas along a route, and it could be used in multiple scenarios. So looking at one-way systems and then looking at kind of viewing areas. And you could fill these in different ways. You could say to people, well, you're in viewing area 54, this is how to get to here, and we expect you to kind of be in that view area between these times. Or you fill as people arrive. So as people come along, there's someone there going, right, you're all into this block and then into this block. So organize it as you go, trying to facilitate kind of one-way systems. You could potentially use something similar at the start of a race when people are putting their kind of equipment or bags or coats into a box to be kind of taken away. And it could be kind of in a big open space. And then somehow they communicate with the organisers to say, right, I've got my stuff off. Can someone take my box away and put it away safely, rather than everybody having to gather at maybe one tent together. So trying to think about the process and then to try and break it down and see what could potentially be done. So another tool that we've got in the OnePlan system now is you can draw out any area anywhere in the world, and it will give you the area in meters or in feet and inches, and then you can select your social distancing, and it'll give you the maximum capacity in that area. We're developing ideas around how that could be spacing. So this is simple ovals, one person per kind of oval, what that would look like, and you can see there that the capacity then comes down again. And we've also modeled it in for examples of viewing areas. So instantly into the system, drops in the viewing area. And again, you can see how much that capacity comes down into those areas. We've also put it into the system. So within the OnePlan system, you can put all your overlay, vehicles, stewards, cones, barriers, everything that's needed. But what we've now also done is overlaid into that some example viewing areas and social distancing kind of parameters. So here's an example along a route where you can drop something in, and then it gives you an idea of what that would potentially kind of look like in the system. We can include AutoCAD drawings if you've already got plans in the systems, and we're also able to get access to kind of latest satellite imagery. So just a few examples of kind of tools and concepts that could be utilized to help you plan and enact social distancing measures. But we're always looking kind of for new ideas and trying to share those widely.
Thanks for that. I'm conscious that we are literally 4 minutes from the end. So what I'm going to propose to do, there's still quite a lot of questions. I'm going to go through and just pull out for those that have to jump off, and we've still got most of the people that started with us on the call, which is a great sign. Obviously, this is of huge interest. But why don't I pick out a few of the summary points? I'll go through them quickly. I'll throw to Marcel and Paul, and then maybe we'll stay on another 10-15 minutes to keep answering the questions in the chat, if that's okay for you, Paul and Marcel. You can spare another 15 minutes or so. But for those that have got commitments that they need to go to, so to me, the key I believe is getting dialogue, and I've been speaking about this for many weeks now on the various forums, is that we have an opportunity in all of this to try and get on the front foot. It's going to vary wherever we are. It's going to vary from town to town, country to country, state to state. That's what I'm hearing. Australia's opening up, New Zealand's opening up, but Australia varies from Victoria, where Melbourne is, to New South Wales, where Sydney is, to Perth in Western Australia. But it's important to try and find an opportunity, hard as that may be, to have a dialogue. And you can't have that dialogue if you don't have some kind of scenario planning. So taking some of the things that you've learned today, a lobby group from within your group, from within the industry, mass participation, to take some of those things along, to have some dialogue. And as Marcel said at the beginning, these people are seen as industry leaders, not the exceptions, the ones that have been able to move away. Multiple scenarios is key. One of the comments that Paul made, important to strike a balance between arrivals, the start, and departures. I think that was what Paul was saying. So, we get hung up sometimes on the big numbers. I've got 20,000, I've got 30,000, but is there a way we can scenario plan? It's not going to be. The reality we need to accept is there's a new normal. We're not going back, maybe not even in a couple of years, to what we used to have, but there's an opportunity to take some stepping stones once we understand what we can manage in our areas that might be commercially viable for us. I was pleasantly surprised to see modeling of 12 to 15,000 people events that are viable, 3,000 runners per 30 minutes, not the massive reductions that people have been talking about, albeit that still obviously needs to be proven and signed off by authorities. I think the key is adjust to your environments. Your course is going to have different pinch points. Your start park's going to have different areas, so you're going to need to make those adjustments around that. I was interested to hear of a revolving start system that would allow for overtaking on the course, which has come up pretty much a number of times here. And I think that the big opportunity to look outside the industry, to see what's being done in retail, to see what's being done in stadiums and arenas and so on. And the point that's been made a couple of times is that we have an industry where people are used to structure. We do a lot of contingency planning. We run with pens and wave starts already. And it's not too far a stretch, albeit that there's communication is going to be key here. Communication with participants, communication with government agencies and licensing authorities to be able to be first movers. But with that, why don't we throw to you, Marcel, to just spend a couple of minutes on something that you may not have covered, a slide that you may want to pop up, and any key observations, and then we'll hang on and answer the questions.
Yeah, there are just a couple of things that I saw. Is it's not just about comparing one location to another location. It's also looking forward in time. So maybe one state is going too fast, or maybe one state is was hit earlier and is further in the development. Like we in the UK, we look to Austria, see what they are doing, because they are bordering Italy, but had the luck of dealing with it more successfully. And now they can do things that would be our turn to do it in a couple of weeks. We can talk to them, see what they are doing, and by that prepare for when it's our turn. That's almost, we don't need to make the same mistakes. They are currently breaking the way for us, and that means it's not just comparing what is better here than there, but it's also looking forward in time. Things will change. Things will go down from 2 meters at one point, and it was also that happened in some countries that people were surprised by how fast things are moving forward and didn't have concepts in place. And for big operations like ours, that means we need to know what is the key value that we either need to wait for or need to trigger in order to have a safe event. But as we all know, we need to figure out, does it make sense to plan now, or is that waste of resources? Or can we plan for one certain scenario, which we then pitch when the time is right to do so? Or we cannot wait for people to come to us.
Great, thank you. And you know, again, you bring out the point, collaboration, so much opportunity for us. You know, there's people from all over the world here, and we can all take different perspectives. And I think one of the great wins from this whole thing is the collaboration. I've been in this industry 35 years. I've never seen such collaboration across the industry of mass participation and in sport as well. And it's so wonderful to see, and we can all help each other. You know, it's not a competition to see who's first back to market. It's a, you know, and in fact, it's important that first back to market sets the right example, that we don't take 3 steps back and we end up with a badly organized event that then ruins it for everyone. So it's behoven on all of us to support each other so that the industry comes back stronger. Paul,
I want to add something to that really quick. That's just very important to me. Whoever is first, please reach out to people like Chris, Robb. Please reach out to industry leader. Whoever you are in the world who is in the responsibility to go first, reach out to those helpful people in the industry that can help you with a collaborative to get this thing going, because there's so much responsibility with this for the whole industry.
Thank you, Marcel. Thank you. Paul?
Yeah, we're all going to have quite tough conversations, and we're going to be in rooms with people who don't want our events to go ahead. And you'll always get the case where someone said, well, I saw in this newspaper, or I saw this article which said this, that, and the other. And you've got to try and just kind of block some of that out, because there is, you know, there's a massive rumors about, you know, and it's very hard to understand what's actually kind of true about COVID-19 and kind of what's not. So what I would suggest with this is, when you're developing these plans and when you're coming up with your risk assessment around it, don't do it in isolation, do it with your partners. So with all the external stakeholders, have the difficult conversations, say, okay, well, what is the risk at this particular point? And then go back to, well, compare that risk to every day. So then what's the risk today when people are going to a market or going to a shopping mall? What are the things we can do? And actually at the end of the process, after a difficult couple of hours of going through the risk assessment, it might come out and go, actually, you're doing more than anybody else is doing. This race is probably the safest place to be compared to going out on the street and going to a Starbucks. Nothing wrong with Starbucks, it's great. You know, go into a kind of coffee shop or something, it might be safer. But what I'd say is get those people in the room with you and do the risk assessment with them and have kind of an honest conversation. If you can take them along the journey, by the end of that meeting, hopefully they're going, yeah, okay, I can see you're doing best endeavors to keep people safe.
Thanks, Paul. Do you want to quickly, before we move on to the questions, you've got an offer with OnePlan for people that are on this call. They can get 20% off. Just use the code MPWMC, I think it was.
Yeah, here it is. Yeah. So if you go onto the website, log in, there's a 14-day kind of free trial. If anybody has any plans that they want us to input for them to get started, send them across. CADs, DWGs, PDF files, no problem. We'll put them in there for you. And then the first month after that, there's a 20% discount as well with the code that's provided there. Free training on the system, so you can just reach out to us. It's very, very easy to use. There's online tutorials on there. But you can reach out to us. We can set up a Zoom call and do any training or ask any questions that are required. But I'll just leave that up there so people can see the code.
Thanks, Paul. Let's jump into some of the questions, some of them comments. So Simon Roberts in the Q&A, there are a large number of media reports outlining a number of events that were seen as hubs for disease transmission. Until these can be counted in some format, surely there will be issues. I mean, I think the reality is there are going to be issues, and there are going to be continually issues all over the world that we're going to be compared to. But we have two options. We can sit on our hands and say, they're not going to allow our events to come back. There's lots of publicity about mass events being the last events. There was a big discussion on our Strength in Numbers on Monday saying, you know, there's talk about essential business. Surely keeping the population fit and healthy is essential business. And is there a way for us to change the narrative to show the contribution that we are making to communities as an industry, and by us trying to get on the front foot, and we might fail. So we take some time, we go and meet with councils, and it's going to vary across the world, or we might be successful. So we can sit and say, we're not going to have any success. Let's fold our arms and wait until 2021 or whenever there's a vaccine and the event comes back. Or we can take some time collaboratively to try and get on the front foot, to try and convince. And it might be that we start to get a trickle of successful events and move forward. So not denying what you're saying, Simon. Clearly, there's going to be elements of those that will happen. You know, there was one at the Liverpool Champions League match, which people are pointing to. There's going to be them in sport. There's going to be them in general life, in tourist spots, and you know, we obviously need to take cognizance. But my personal belief is that we need to build scenarios and have conversations. I think I've covered pretty much everything in the Q&A box. Let's just quickly go through. Thank you for all the thank yous and feedbacks. Let me just jump through those. Get a doctor on your team too, just borrowing the idea from innovative public space design. Great feedback. Sorry, just go through.
If I may add to what you said, I mean, I was involved with Liverpool, working with them on a couple of things, but one thing in risk analysis that was always true, maybe the best lesson in risk analysis, is that safety is the absence of risk to a known and acceptable degree. That means there's always a risk in everything we're doing. Going to Starbucks is going to an event. We all know that we have fatalities at our events. But we also know that running in a big event in a city, a marathon, is the safest place where I can run, much safer than doing it alone in the park or in the woods, because I do have a network around me that supports me with a reaction time that is much faster than anywhere else. And that's where we need to get. The risk needs to be known and acceptable. Currently, we are not there. It's not acceptable right now. And even worse, we don't know really where we are until we really took our events apart with the things that Paul offers, with the things that risk analysis offered. So we need to know where the risk lies, and then we need to reach a point where it is acceptable to do it. It will not be risk-free. It never was. Going on the street was never risk-free. Running an event was never risk-free. But it was acceptable. And we need to get there again with this combined effort. And if there was one aid station question that
yeah, that's a great point. Thank you, Marcel. There was one about aid station. I think it was directed at Paul, but just it was a cost-related one. Maybe.
Yes.
Yeah.
If I can add an example to this, and then it was from Nick. First of all, hi Nick. We ran some tests with New York Road Runners with Chicago, where we checked under the new circumstances what are the aid station requirements and would they cost more or not. We came to the point that they actually don't, because first of all, we're going to restrict our runner flow. That means we need less hands because less people are passing any point where they would need to get fluid. Second thing is space. We will need to space them out as we need to space everything out. And then we need to have etiquette in it, which means only go if you get reached a cup of water or a bottle of water. May that be on the pole, maybe even, but don't go to the table and queue up there. And for that, we need to know how many people pass this aid station per minute so that we can prepare to work just as fast. And that goes into the education piece. We need to know what's happening there. Prepare not just in general, that will fit, it always fit. We need to know we need to really know what will happen there to be able to, as Paul said, it's basically a giant queue. Work just as fast, let them not accumulate in one space and spread it out. What we ended up with as a result is we need less people, we need more space, and we need to really know what's happening there.
That's really useful. Thank you. And you know, again, this is reinforcement that there are so many studies that are happening. There's collaboration happening. You know, Mike Nishi, I'm not sure if Mike was on the call tonight. He was registered for it. One of the most giving people in the industry that I know. He's always happy to share his information. He's very much out there for the betterment of the industry. And there are many other people like Mike in the industry that are sharing this for the better of the industry. So, you know, don't go and hide in a hole. Put your hand up. Ask for advice. Ask for help. There's people out there that are looking to support the industry. Paul Mahon, there should be an actual, as per local registrations or PR-related reason to wear face masks, registration, assembly, start line. Would a neck scarf be acceptable for this purpose? I've seen some publicity around the fact that maybe that does work. I mean, I'm based in Bali, and we see more and more the scarves are actually cloth scarves, and I mean, the face masks are made of cloth. They're designer. They got all sorts of things, and you've seen lots of it in the media. So I'm thinking that you know, without being a medical expert, I think that helps. Clearly, you know, the high level medical ones are more effective, but I believe that helps to a degree. Joe Ditch is saying, do you have any thoughts around medical provision, toilets, catering, and general event site? Maybe, you know, Paul, you're nodding. Do you want to pick that one up, just in terms of social distancing around toilets? I think that's part of your OnePlan model as well, isn't it?
Yeah, that's my favourite subject as well, Chris, toilets and portaloos. So traditionally, they're always in a line in a block, and obviously you're going to have challenges there where individual kind of people waiting outside of each portaloo toilet and then coming out and then passing. So a couple of options. You could do it in kind of a horseshoe shape, and what that does, it spreads out the distance then between the toilets, and it means that people then on the queues, there's more space. The other is putting a single queue system in to feed multiple kind of toilets. And you know, we can kind of share some of those examples, but we do need to start thinking kind of differently about that. You're going to have less people on site, so you are going to have a bit more space. So maybe kind of spreading out the catering concessions, spreading out the toilets facilities, not maybe having one big block together and having multiples across the site. Maybe, you know, another way of doing it. But, you know, you've got to maximize the space you've got. So if someone says, oh, you've got, you know, only a third the amount of runners that you had last year, we'll say, yeah, but we still need the space because we need to enable social distancing.
Great, fantastic, thank you. There's another one, Kevin Harmer, just along the PR side of things, run together, run safe, maybe an opportunity for some kind of a global movement in terms of etiquette and so on. And then more apologies for the pronunciation, Muara Sianturi. According to these models, how many % do you think we must shrink the number of road race participants? Maybe we throw that to you, Marcel.
So we found out by, as I said, we went through, and I need to credit where credit is due, Chicago, New York, who basically, we modeled all distances and all events from cross country to park to city. And we realized we need to start around like 84% slower than we normally would start. And that depends on 6 feet or 1.5 or 2 meters. So 84% slower. And now we can calculate how much longer would we need. And we ran examples of marathons. We realized we can start them in an hour because they have like 12,000 or something, and they would actually go ahead and work. Now they only need to prove it only to the decision makers, but they would actually work. So what you need to keep in mind is not how much your participant number would shrink, but how fast you can get things moving and get things in. And last number that I'm going to say for today is we realized to make an event happen with 45,000 people, simulated, but never more than 5,000 people in one space. Not on the transport, not at the start, not at the finish, not on the course, not on the way home. Really spread them out. So what I want to leave you with is you're going to start probably around 84% or 80% slower. And now you can calculate how much time you have. And that's going to be your number for now. We need to do this again in the future to see where we can develop with everything that will develop around us at the fast pace that we live in.
That's, you know, that point just keeps coming back to me, as I think, you know, many people get fixated on, you know, I've got 30,000 runners, I've got to have 30,000 runners. The new normal is not going to have 10 or 15 or 20,000 runners on a start line, but it doesn't mean that you can't accommodate 12 to 15,000 runners in your event if you're prepared to change the experience. And the reality is that, you know, I worked on Singapore for many years, race director. We got up to 60,000 participants at one stage. And, you know, the biggest complaint was the experience. You know, it was driven by multiple factors, but people weren't necessarily having a great time with 60,000 participants and 50,000 participants on the route. So here is a perfect opportunity for us as an industry to maybe pivot and harness this. We've now got a reason, albeit that it creates a knock-on effect with road closures and traffic and longer road closures, but to absolutely enhance not only the participant safety, but the participant experience. We've got a reason to be able to say that we're going to have not all those people standing on a start line for an hour waiting to be flagged off and get through. And if we pivot it and look at the positive opportunity to say, we've now got a reason to really create, I mean, do you really know if you're on a start line with 10,000 people or 3,000 or 4,000 people, the experience of or even 1,000 people around you, but still a buzz with what you're experiencing. But then when you get out there and have a more free-flowing run, you might end up with participants saying that this new normal is better, obviously with the caveat that that needs to fit, within a commercial reality for people. Folks, we're up to 1:15, and I think we really should wrap it in fairness to the panelists and those of you that might have other meetings. But thank you to all of you that have taken the time to join in. Thank you to my panelists, Paul and Marcel. Thank you so much for those great insights. Hope to see some of you strength in numbers on Monday, 8:30 a.m. and 4:30 p.m. Singapore time. If there's anything I can help you with, whether it's the links to those, the aid station, chris@chrisrobb.asia, please feel free to email me directly if I can connect you to people or help in any way I can to help us get this great industry back on the road as soon as possible. Have a wonderful morning, evening, night, wherever you are. The Australians are going to bed, the Americans are waking up, but have a wonderful day. Thanks so much again, Marcel and Paul, and see you again soon.
Anytime.
Cheers. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.